Well, it looks like folks have joined the meeting. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's a Wildlife Wednesday presentation with the Center for Wildlife Studies. For those of you new to the program, my name is Jeff Stetz. I'm the Director of Science and an Assistant Professor with CWS. In part, I've been helping to coordinate this series, which we see as another way to help educate the public about topics on wildlife conservation, research, planning, while showcasing some of the amazing work that our staff and colleagues are involved with. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Mira Mishkin. Mira is a geographer and interdisciplinary ecologist with over 20 years of experience in environmental science, specializing in common pool resource management and sustainability strategies across the US and Latin America. Her work focuses on, no surprise, Bayesian modeling and decision science, particularly using Bayesian causal networks to support protected area management, such as in Mexico's Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve. Mira is committed to centering local and indigenous voices in resource management, advancing innovative multivariate analyses, and strengthening case study methods for more meaningful meta-analyses. She has collaborated with universities, NGOs, protected area managers, and agencies at all levels. As an educator, Mira brings an experiential, skills-based approach to teaching, connecting students with real-world practitioners and opportunities to explore career paths. She has held faculty and research positions at Unity College and the University of Florida, among others. She's about to roll out a new class at CWS about Bayesian Causal Networks, the topic she's going to enlighten us all on today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mira.
I'm obviously pretty excited about it. And I thought that I would pre-record a sort of general overview so that people could have a chance to get some sort of foundational basics and maybe generate some questions for the Q&A after it's done. We can have a great conversation about the challenges and applications for Bayesian causal network modeling.
All right, well, that will get the video going. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the basics and applications of Bayesian causal networks. They can also be called causal Bayesian networks. You will also see them referred to as Bayesian belief networks and Bayesian nets. Bayesian causal networks, or BCNs, offer a distinct advantage in modeling complex multivariate systems due to their ability to handle uncertainty, integrate prior knowledge, and represent causal relationships between variables. Unlike frequentist methods, which focus on hypothesis testing with fixed parameters, BCNs treat variables as probabilistic entities, updating information dynamically as new data emerges. Bayesian networks manage uncertainty by modeling variables as probabilistic distributions, allowing for dynamic updates based on new data. They handle missing data through probabilistic inference, estimating missing values based on the relationships within the network, making them powerful tools for complex real-world problems. In complex systems like ecology, socioeconomic or socioecological systems, human geography, where relationships between variables are intricate, BCNs can model causal dependencies and conditional relationships, capabilities that traditional models can struggle to represent. BCNs also excel at integrating both qualitative and quantitative data simultaneously, enabling a richer, more holistic analysis. By incorporating prior knowledge, whether from expert opinions, historical, and/or current data, BCNs continuously update their models as new information becomes available, offering a more adaptable, robust approach that has significant implications for monitoring. This flexibility, along with the ability to handle incomplete or missing data, makes Bayesian networks ideal for real-world scenarios where uncertainty is high. Bayesian networks have been used in fire management, ecological planning, ecosystem assessments, fossil fuel extraction, and a wide variety of other socio-environmental applications in which the systems at work are varied and even convoluted. Bayesian networks are a practical tool for complex multivariate analyses because they capture causal relationships, integrate diverse data types, update beliefs with new information, and provide clarity under uncertainty. They also add an element of instant gratification as you watch the model run and update with the higher order variance visible in the variable relationships in real time. It's a lot of fun if you're into that kind of thing. This breaks down the prior and posterior probabilities in the simple Bayesian derivative that sort of gives an overview of priors versus posteriors, because we talk a lot about probability in Bayesian networks. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the math, don't worry. You don't need to know how it works to create a Bayesian network. It just helps conceptually, I think. And I'll explain this in more detail in the BCN course introduction if you take the course. For now, we'll just get into a quick overview of probability versus likelihood and how that informs this method. But the sort of foundational concept is that we have our probability, we have our hypothesis, and we have our known data. And so we're looking at how what we have seen happen before will inform our predictions about it based on the posterior, like what's happened, based on what has happened before. So in a nutshell, to know how events may occur, we can look at how they have occurred before. The longer they have been occurring, the greater the probability that they will again repeat that pattern or some permutation of it. This is a very simplified explanation to give you an idea of the fundamental utility of the foundational concepts of the BCN. At the heart of Bayesian statistics is the distinction between probability and likelihood. Probability pertains to possible results, while likelihood relates to hypotheses. Frequentist statistics are rooted in the Popperian theory that science involves testing hypotheses for false ability. In this framework, we test the null hypothesis instead of the hypothesis of interest. If the null hypothesis is rejected, we conclude our hypothesis is likely correct without directly testing it against the data. The null hypothesis by design can never be proven true, only rejected. Likelihood is tied to a hypothesis, but is not directly tested. Due to the limited set of alternative hypotheses, only relative likelihoods or ratios of likelihoods have meaningful interpretation. Probability focuses on possible results which are mutually exclusive and exhaustive. For example, in a coin toss prediction scenario, the probabilities of outcomes, 0 to 11 correct predictions, must sum to 1. In contrast, hypotheses are not mutually exclusive or exhaustive. Multiple hypotheses can coexist, and one hypothesis may be nested within another. While results are mutually exclusive and exhaustive, hypotheses are not, and their range can overlap. Additionally, likelihoods cannot determine conditionality or directionality. Bayesian probability, by contrast, examines the outcome within the context of the influencing variables and predictors as relying on prior probabilities, helping to identify leverage points for future predictions. By manipulating these variables, we can predict outcomes with a reasonable degree of accuracy, from 80 to 90% or higher. A Bayesian causal network is a Bayesian network that is specifically designed to represent causal relationships. In a BCN, the parents of a node are considered its direct causes, and the children are considered its direct effects. Non-parent ancestors are indirect causes, and non-child descendants are indirect effects, which will make a lot of sense when you take the course, but this is based on outer nodes and inner nodes. I'll explain in a moment. If a Bayesian network has a directed edge from variable A to variable B, and this network is interpreted as a BCN, it suggests that A is a direct cause of B. This is evident by the arrows you can see from nodes pointing to other nodes. This is another benefit of BCNs, is that they're very visually intuitive and easy to understand, even with the cryptic node headings. The advantages of causal interpretation is causal reasoning. BCNs enable reasoning about interventions and counterfactuals, allowing us to predict the effects of actions and changes in the system. It also provides improved understanding by explicitly representing causal relationships. They can provide a deeper understanding of the underlying mechanisms driving the observed data. Bayesian networks are particularly well suited to handling uncertainty and incomplete or missing data, which are common challenges in real-world modeling. This is due to their probabilistic foundation and flexible structure, which allows them to quantify and manage uncertainty in a systematic way. First, in handling uncertainty, BCNs model uncertainty by representing variables as probability distributions rather than fixed values. Each node in a BCN corresponds to a random variable, and the edges represent conditional dependencies between variables. These probability distributions capture the uncertainty about a variable's value given the information from other related variables. As new data becomes available, Bayes' theorem allows the network to update these probability distributions, providing a refined understanding of certainty over time. This probabilistic framework enables BCNs to model complex relationships and causal dependencies while accounting for varying degrees of confidence in the data. Instead of offering a single point estimate, BCNs provide a range of possible outcomes, making them valuable in decision-making scenarios where uncertainty must be carefully considered. They also are particularly effective in dealing with incomplete or missing data. Unlike many traditional methods that require complete data sets to make inferences, BCNs can estimate the missing values based on the relationships modeled within the network. By leveraging known data and conditional dependencies encoded in the network, BCNs apply probabilistic inference to predict the most likely values for missing variables. For instance, if a variable's value is missing, the BCN can calculate the probability of that variable given the observed values of its parent nodes in the network. This ability to estimate missing data is achieved through inference algorithms such as expectation maximization or Markov chain Monte Carlo, which use the observed data to fill in the gaps while maintaining the overall consistency of the model. Here's a BCN in practice. So this is a version of the model, right? So this is what it could look like. And I'll come back to this one and how I used it momentarily. What I want to stress right out the gate is how complex each of those little boxes are. Each of the boxes or nodes is the outcome of extensive research into a particular variable and its indicator or indicators. This analysis of each variable results in a prior probability, as I mentioned in the previous slides. That prior gets operationalized into a state that is used in the conditional probability table seen on the right. These states are based on prior data trends, which are ideally over 1 year and as far out as several decades in repetition. In many persistent systems, it is unusual that behavior patterns fluctuate significantly, making them relatively stable metrics in management systems. It is the permutations of the possible states in the CPT that result in the measurement of the interactions between and among variables, as well as the probable predictions the model can provide based on manipulating the variables and goals. You can see those in the columns, those states, in the columns for each node in the CPT excerpt on the right of the slide. As is always stressed with statistical modeling, what you put in is what you get out. Thus, the quality of the parameters and variable analyses is extremely important. The final picture of the scenario is only as accurate and clear as the parameters you provide for the operational universe you are measuring. The course I'm offering provides detailed explanations and practice and troubleshooting for creating basic BCN models. Once you can construct a basic model, it's very straightforward to construct an aggregate like the one you can see on the screen, or even a larger one. The operationalizing portion of the course is only offered in the premium version due to its depth. Additionally, I provide a walkthrough on how to develop decision nets to maximize decision-based outcomes. We will also use sensitivity analyses to determine probable predictions based on variable manipulations and how those impact the different nodes and node clusters. The study I used to showcase the application of BCN was published in 2021 and is called Managing with Logic, a Bayesian Causal Network Assessment of Forest Management in the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve. I applied BCN to look at the variables of impact using the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons on forest management efficiency in select portions of the reserve. Both individual impact and variable conditionality on the efficiency of forest management in those areas of the reserve were considered. In plain language, I used Bayesian Causal Networks to look at which variables in the critical list had the most causal impact on forest cover density maintenance in different areas of the Monarch Reserve. As an aside, this is a small monarch population not open to the public that relocated in this particular area about 5 or more years ago. It gives you an idea of how they cluster on the sacred Oyamel firs that grow in the high altitude regions of the state of Mexico and Michoacan. All of the orange that you can see on the trees are monarchs clustering together for warmth and safety. And next, I'll show you how they start to drop off and fly around to go forage.
Oh, sorry, I coughed. Do it again, I won't cough.
Oh, wow.
Sorry about the coughing. That was Dan Fagan, who was taking a tour of that community with us. Just in terms of the visual feature of the seamless integration of data, these are samples of the conditionality output, frequency of occurrence measures, and the normalized percentages that allow comparison of qualitative and quantitative data simultaneously on the left. So the normalized percentages were used in the determination of the states that act as prior probabilities, while the impact chart on the right shows the variables that were a direct and or conditional influence as outputs of the Bayesian model to tell us what variables acted in concert. This is very advantageous in complex multivariate systems like management, since you can look at conditional relationships without having to do separate analyses. In the next slide, I'll go back to the Bayesian Causal Network model I showcased in the second slide, and you can see how it all fits together. The outputs also, my variable values that went into the model and the conditionality or dependence, right, are outputs. You do also get numeric outputs, and that's where the higher order variance comes in. So if you look at this model, we have our values for each node. The outer nodes are parents to the children that they point to. If a child points to a node, then they become ancestors, parents, and the node that's pointed to is the child. So when I was talking about parents and children and direct and indirect relationships, this is what we were referring to, right? These outer nodes, the nodes around the outside of the model, are indirectly influencing management, while group characteristics as a conglomeration of variables influences management. And we can look at how each individual variable influences management efficiency. We can also look at how each category affects each variable and even how it affects the child of management efficiency. So it's complicated, but if you take the course, it will all make more sense. In the 4 cases that I applied BCN to, I used the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons as the model parameters. These 36 variables were synthesized by Arun Agarwal in 2003 after decades of work by Eleanor Ostrom, Robert Wade, and Balland and Plateau in the early 1990s on common pool resource theory and practice. And of course, Arun Agarwal worked closely with Eleanor Ostrom. These variables are well established both empirically and theoretically. However, since there are over 30 of them, a holistic analysis would be impossible with many other statistical methods due to statistical washout and the manipulations that would be needed to simultaneously compare the different variable classes. I used normalized percentages based on relative measures of frequency of occurrence. I was able to combine physical numeric measures like size, overlap, and poverty with qualitative measures like access to low-cost adjudication and rules being easy to understand. In the study that I conducted, the sensitivity analysis focused on the manipulation of the conditional relationships clearly indicated the individual variables with the greatest influence, as well as which variable clusters, based on their category, were more influential. The 4 cases are not enough to scale up to draw broader conclusions, but the idea is to apply this to the entirety of the reserve so that broader conclusions can be drawn regarding the whole of the Monarch Reserve. This could be applied to any management system and other complex scenarios in which higher order variance based on conditionality and directionality is informative. The results were helpful in explaining the variation in management efficiency in different parts of the reserve in spite of a blanket management approach throughout the protected area. It should be noted that the study and its results also aided in improving management dialogue by reopening dialogue between local and central managers. It also guided and focused dialogue, which also provided a voice for local managers in having a truly participatory role in rule establishment, which is germane to a successful management program, according to common pool resource theory. The local managers, some of whom were not computer savvy or tech savvy, were able to intuitively understand the model and how I was able to arrive at the outputs from the model by its visual presentation, as were other affected interested parties involved in the Monarch Reserve maintenance, governance, and policy. Moreover, since the model is easily updated as changes or new information become available, it is a useful monitoring tool and provides a baseline for the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve in the 20th century. It also provides a systematic approach with broad applicability in terms of standardized operationalization and management assessment. So to sum up the utility of the BCN, it is a very useful tool for complex multivariate systems in which variable interactions are informative to understanding management and interventions. This is particularly useful when mitigating uncertainty, as analyzing operational parameters in complex social ecological systems is always involves uncertainty. It is also an ever-present element in any scientific analytical endeavor. Looking at the operational system holistically, we can more rapidly and efficiently determine the leverage or intervention points to improve management in protected areas and even in other more general management scenarios. This obviously extends to other complex multivariate scenarios in which variable interactions and higher order variance are informative and statistical washout is a risk. Additionally, the method can easily and simultaneously incorporate quantitative and qualitative data, both present in complex systems. Moreover, BCN is a useful tool for monitoring systems and outcomes, as updating models is extremely easy once a model is created. You simply make the needed adjustments or additions in your established model and run it. This is clearly a very rapid overview, but hopefully it helps to provide a bit of insight into the Bayesian causal networks and how they can be applied, and how you can develop one. As I mentioned, we will delve into the creation of the models and their manipulation in the Bayesian Causal Network Modeling course. It will facilitate a deeper understanding of how all these aspects of BCNs can transform the way that we approach system analysis, prediction, decision-making, and monitoring. Thank you so much for your time.
So if anyone has questions, feel free to either chime in or put them in the chat box. I have a few of my own, of course, but I want to defer to folks in the audience. They want to go first. Give it a couple seconds. Also, you can see I put a couple links in there. The first is to the paper that Mira referenced on the Monarch study. So we've got a hand raised.
Hello.
Hi.
Awesome talk. I am so curious about how all of this works, and it was so fun to hear you explain a real example. Something that I've been wondering about with this kind of model structure is how to address feedback loops, since it's like a directed acyclical kind of style. I work in plant soil feedbacks, and I'm trying to link the outcome to the input and struggling.
Oh, that would certainly require more than a quick and dirty answer now, you know what I mean? But can you do it? Yes, absolutely. And one could argue that if you look at the model that I gave as an example, that was one of the models that I used for community in the paper that I referenced. The management efficiency, a lot of those, there were a lot of feedback loops in there. And basically you're going to model those, right? You're essentially going to model feedback loops. If you have multiple feedback loops that feed into an outcome, then you're going to have an aggregate model like the one that you saw on your screen just a moment ago. So, like I said, I hope that helps a little bit. Is it possible? Yes, ma'am. Yes, it is. And what you'll do is model those and then perhaps connect them with an outcome node, a child node.
Okay, thank you.
Can you see the chat, Mira? There's a question from
Could you give
Nancy
a
in
quick
there.
overview of what sort of ecological? Oh my goodness. Oh, there's so many. And what are the limitations when it comes to time series and depth of data? Ooh, see, It all depends on the kind of question you're asking. If you're asking about how yeah, see this
Hey,
this
that was my question. That was my question. I can be more specific. I guess
okay,
I'm
yes,
wary
let's
of
do
like
that.
when fish escapement models are built seemingly around BCNs because, and especially with the rapidity of like how much is changing with climate change, when we're using such old data to create these causal relationships, like I just have such wariness around that. And so I'm just wondering how BCNs like account for that.
Oh, so they will account for that. So what you can do also, though, if you want to look at direct accountability, like how much are the current changes affecting, these systems, you can model with, like, say, decade or 20-year-old data, and then look at today where you know that changes have occurred and see, you can mess with your model and put in those new changes, and the Bayesian network is going to tell you the specific variables and the degree to which they interacted, sort of the more influential variables and how they interacted. I think that would be a great application for it. If that makes sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Anyone else?
While we wait for the next question, I'll throw one at you.
Okay.
What would you say have been some of the roadblocks for developing, applying acceptance of BCNs by practitioners?
Oh, I think just a lack of familiarity with Bayesian statistics and understanding how they work. And the fact that I actually had this problem with my committee in graduate school. The head of my committee could not wrap her head around what I was doing. And I explained it and I explained it and I explained it. And then I ended up having to do the lasso analysis for my PhD and publishing the Bayesian analysis separately because they wouldn't accept it. So there is a lot of unfamiliarity around Bayesian statistics and what the outputs mean and how they can be interpreted that I think can be a barrier to it. But I think that has changed a lot since 2013. I mean, people are using it a lot more frequently, and we see the applications in ecology are really, really wide. And I use a lot of those in the course materials for the Bayesian network course. I have a lot of those examples so that people can get a sense for just how varied the uses are and how they've been applied. I think it's important to take a look at that. Does that answer your question?
I assumed it was the Bayesian hurdle for a lot of folks.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. But it's gotten, like I said, it's gotten much better. And as we understand also this fuzzy logic, the concept of sort of fuzzy logic, which is essentially this, you're looking at it in real time. And so it's visually intuitive. That actually helps considerably. And right now that, like I said, the applications, Canada has really exploded with the use of Bayesian modeling, Bayesian causal networks for ecology.
Hopefully we'll catch up.
Oof.
I have a question there from Adam.
Yeah. Oh, you work a lot. Good. My advice to anyone is that life is too short to be Bayesian. It takes much longer to develop a Bayesian model, and often the answer is the same. I'm actually publishing a paper on that, and not necessarily. But again, we're looking when you want to use Bayes for holistic analysis. It takes a bit longer to establish your model, but when it comes to monitoring, updating a model, as you know, is extremely straightforward. So what takes a while is setting up the model, but I even have some tricks for kind of quick setup. It really doesn't. I don't think it really takes that much longer than various frequentist analyses, like going into R and programming and things like that. I don't know. I don't think I would consider it longer, at least not for the uses that I've applied it to. But certainly your perspective is understandable. Aside from being able to use categorical predictors and being able to data inference, are BCNs friendly different structural equation models? Like I said, when you're deciding on whether you're going to choose between structural equation models and Bayesian, I just think it depends on your question and how much you want to rely. I mean, like I said, the visual intuitive nature of the Bayesian modeling is really helpful when you're talking to practitioners. So it can be useful in that way as well. But I do think it depends on your preference, and I think it depends on your question, and I think it depends on how complicated your interactions are and how difficult those are to elucidate. I don't know. I hope that makes sense without getting into like some kind of specific example that would sort of take me time to develop an example for. Does that make sense, Adam? Yes, I think so. Okay. Yeah, I know it's hard in this venue, but it really depends on the level of interaction you're looking at and the question that you're asking.
And at least my tiny experience in the Bayesian world, the interpretation is so much more in line with how we tend to think naturally in our day-to-day life. In terms of probably instead of looking at confidence intervals, looking at credible intervals and actual probabilities of different values, and not a point value that we treat as truth and kind of ignoring, at least in the management realm I was in, that was how those were treated. And it's the obvious dangers that come with that. Another question that you and I have discussed a little bit offline is if you could talk about the distinction between descriptive versus predictive efforts and what the respective challenges may be, or how well BCNs are applied to those.
See, that's what I think is great about because we're basing it on pretty consistent metrics and repetitive patterns. If you haven't looked into Donatella Meadows' book on systems that was published after her death, her untimely, I might add, if that was so sad, because she had a lot more to offer. I think she was brilliant. But anyhow, she talks about systems, and she talks about how entrenched systems tend to change very slowly. So certainly ecological systems, regardless of these temperature changes that are forcing changes to occur before natural adaptability can kick in, are certainly cause emergent and anomalous behavior, right? Or what we would consider previously so. But generally, when we look at, patterns and we look at predictability, having a method that allows you to be both descriptive and predictive at the same time, I think can be practical. And Adam's point about them taking some time to develop is correct, but I just don't feel like they're that much more intensive than some of the more, than some of the more elaborate and multi-step frequentist approaches, especially when it comes to programming and using Python or R or things like that. So I think in that case, it's relatively similar. But what the model provides is not only a visual description, but as you're creating the states for the nodes, right? As you are researching the variables, you've determined your operational parameters. And so you describe those. And then you're going to describe what the indicators are and how you came to the states that you determine for your variables. So all of that is descriptive. It's descriptive of pieces of a scenario, and then ultimately becomes descriptive of the entirety of a system, right, that you're looking at to analyze and draw conclusions from and find leverage points, and ideally use those as effective intervention points. But because we know how the patterns run, and we know that ideally, we're not going to model something that has been, we could model something that's been erratic, and that's a whole conversation. You can do it, and you can get very useful predictive results based on variable behavior. But the point being, when you're looking at these repetitive cycles or systems, you can predict with reasonable accuracy, at least within the time frame that you're analyzing. So it can be months, it can be years, and it can be even decades. So you get both a predictive and descriptive piece with these, which I think is efficient.
Yes, an important distinction like we've talked about a little bit. Sometimes gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? Or is there anything maybe you'd like to follow up on, Mira, or add to before we wrap up?
Well, I think it's hard in a soundbite to convey that we often repeat the use of certain tools because that's what people do, and that's what people did. And I think that's great. I think it has definite merit in some cases, but I also think it's worth, when you're taking a holistic look at systems, we are at a point now where there is no ecological system that doesn't have a human influence, that doesn't have a political influence, that doesn't have a governance, right? That doesn't have an influence by humans that has a significant impact on the outcomes. There are also goals. One of the reasons why I like these is that it's really easy to expose the difference between stated goals and actual goals when it comes to management of anything, but certainly ecological systems management. So I think that's food for thought. Alex, I might have missed this, but are nodes created from data over larger space or weighted? Yes. So here's the thing. You weight variables based on their scale and context, for sure. You can. And it's really straightforward to do that. You end up doing that with your edges, like with the arrows. It's really simple to do that. So you can. You can also look at, based on your outcome, your outcome values for your variables. When you start messing around, often the Bayesian model itself will tell you what's weighted heavier. So if you don't weight it, it could weight it for you. So it's interesting how that works. The Bayesian model itself, if you don't weight it, will probably tell you that some of those things have a heavier effect than you expect. But you can weight it yourself if you like, right? If that makes sense for your question and your analysis. Does that make sense, Alex? Oh, good. Okay.
Well, any other questions out there? I still have a pile, but I feel like I've been monopolizing things a bit.
They might come up too as you start asking questions, because I think I've given a lot of information and sort of a different way of looking at things that I know for me, I can be a little slow on processing. So sometimes I get stimulated by other people's questions.
Just thinking before you speak, unlike some of us.
Sometimes.
I had one, I guess, more about parameter selection in the first place, how someone goes about selecting the parameters, what some of the challenges might be. Can the same parameters be used in multiple nodes, for example, or would that be considered inappropriate? Just those,
Okay.
the diagram was so heavy with parameters. Just how would folks go about approaching identifying and setting up those parameters?
So just like, anytime you walk into a research program, right? Anytime you set up a research project, you're going to have your parameters. Those are pretty easy to, I think those are pretty easy to consider depending on what your question is, right? Your question is really going to determine what those parameters are and what your known variables are. So that's why I chose the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons, because they are the parameters for common pool resource management that we are aware of at the moment. And I wanted to see what a large group of pertinent, germane, and necessary, variables for successful management. I wanted to see if full compliance for those, based on, because they're sort of qualified by the researchers, I wanted to see if full compliance was necessary in reality for those systems to be efficient in their management of the forest. And the answer is, in the 4 cases, no, it is not. Generally compliant, yes, but all of the variables don't have to be compliant. So it really depends on your question, I think. It depends on what is known about the behaviors of variables and things like that. So that is unfortunately a question I feel sort of unqualified to answer without sort of more specificity. But I hope that makes sense. Your question almost always dictates your parameters, I think.
Any other questions?
I hope it wasn't boring.
We had a lot of
And I'm
folks.
so sorry about the technical issues. It'll be
We
memorable.
folks joined in the middle, so we may have missed some of the background that could have sparked a few questions. But when we post this, I'm gonna put a few more links in here. One repeated. The first link is to Mira's class that we've mentioned coming up here soon, and the second is to her profile on CWS. And then the last is for our YouTube channel, or playlist, where we'll post all these Wildlife Wednesday presentations. We'll clean this one up a little bit and take out the technical issues and get that posted here pretty soon.
Thank goodness
also,
for technology. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all been through this, at least. I think at this point, that's the one comforting thought.
Yes, a notch on my belt.
No, this is it for the week. We have, as part of this series, we're putting together 4 or 5 talks consecutively. And each Wednesday next week is actually a former PhD student of mine, Luke McDonald, who up in Alaska worked on moose vehicle collisions and is just a wizard, also Bayesian modeler, who's been developing the tools with Google Earth Engine and the Dynamic World program, which is, it's fascinating with the work we've done together, looking at bald eagles up here in Alaska, for example. Truly powerful set of tools. Hopefully folks can tune in for that. And then the week after is Dr. Paul Schutte, who's also in Alaska, coincidentally, with CWS. He's a distance sampling guru who has worked extensively in several parts of Alaska and Africa. So he's going to talk about bridging very, very different systems and applying these tools. So we certainly encourage people to attend for those. We've got presentations throughout the fall. Hopefully they're entertaining and enlightening. And we're always soliciting new ideas. If people have certain topics they'd like us to try and bring folks in on, we'd appreciate that. Maybe sending off a survey after this to get some more feedback from folks. We'd appreciate anything they care to share. As always, if any people have questions, feel free to contact Mira or myself or anyone at CWS to follow up. Of course, please take a look at our course offerings. That's partly why we're here, is to help promote these courses. I think people can see right away the value in this additional training to help bring these more powerful tools into more acceptance and use in conservation. If there aren't any more questions, we can close it for the day. And yeah, thank you again to everyone who tuned in. Hopefully it's nice wherever you are. I'm curious what the span is geographically. Look into that later. But yes, thank everyone again for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at the next presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mira, for presenting. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.